You know, it's funny how sometimes, when you're right in the middle of something, you can't quite see how messed up it really is. It's like living in a house with a slow leak. You notice the drip, maybe a little discoloration on the ceiling, but you convince yourself it's fine. Just a quirk of the old place. Until one day the whole damn ceiling comes crashing down. That was my life. A slow, persistent leak of disrespect and financial drain, disguised as family love and responsibility. Weak. They called me too sensitive, ungrateful, selfish. If I had $1 for every time my parents or my older brother, Mark, threw those words at me, I'd probably be living on a private island, sipping Mai Tais, far, far away from all this drama. But instead, here I am, still in the gilded cage they built for me. One that looks perfectly normal from the outside, but felt like it was suffocating me from the inside out. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Alex. I'm 32, and on paper, I've got it all together. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in finance, landed a coveted position at a reputable investment firm right out of college, and I've been climbing that corporate ladder ever since. I manage a portfolio that would make most people's eyes water. I've got a comfortable apartment in the city, a decent car, and I rarely have to worry about money in my professional life. I'm known for being sharp, decisive, and unflappable. My colleagues respect me. My clients trust me. I'm good at what I do. But step into my personal life, especially when it came to my family, and it was a completely different story. It was like I shed my professional skin at the door and transformed back into the timid, people-pleasing girl who just wanted to be loved and accepted. And they, my dear family, knew exactly how to exploit that. It always started subtly. When I got my first big bonus, Mom called. Not to congratulate me, but to mention how their old car was on its last legs and how hard it was for Dad to get to work. Of course, I offered to help. Then it was Mark. Always Mark. He was a year older than me, charming on the surface, but with an entitlement complex bigger than the national debt. He jumped from one brilliant business venture to another, each one more doomed than the last. And guess who was always expected to bail him out or provide seed money? Yours truly. Alex, you're doing so well, sweetie, my mom would coo over the phone, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Your brother just needs a little push. He's got such a good heart. You know, and family helps family, right? And I'd always say yes. Because how could I say no? They were my family. They raised me. They sacrificed for me. That was the narrative they drilled into my head since childhood. Any attempt to set a boundary, any hesitation to open my wallet, was immediately met with a barrage of guilt trips and emotional blackmail. After all we've done for you, Dad would sigh, his voice heavy with disappointment. You're going to turn your back on your own brother. What kind of person does that make you? Alex, the word weak wasn't always spoken aloud in those early days, but it was implied in every eye roll, every dismissive wave of the hand, every knowing glance exchanged between my parents when I dared to express a different opinion or suggest that maybe, just maybe, I had my own life to live. I was the good daughter, the responsible one, the family's ATM, and in their eyes, being good meant being compliant, quiet, and eternally giving. This past year, though, the leak wasn't just a drip anymore. It was more like a gushing pipe, threatening to flood my entire life. It started with my parents pushing me to invest in a property, our family's dream home. They called it. It was a beautiful, sprawling house in a wealthy suburb, far beyond what they could afford on their own. The unspoken expectation, of course, was that I would be the primary financier. It's an investment, Alex, Mark had argued, leaning back in his chair during one of our strained Sunday dinners, a smirk playing on his lips. Think of the equity we'll all chip in, eventually. Eventually, in Mark's vocabulary, meant never. I tried to push back. Mom, Dad, I'm already saving for my own down payment, and this house, it's a huge commitment. It's not just the purchase price, it's the upkeep, the taxes. My mom just waved her hand dismissively. Oh, you worry too much, Alex. You always do. That's why you're so skinny. We're a family, we'll figure it out. And besides, think of how nice it would be to have enough space for everyone, for family gatherings. The implication was clear: if I didn't chip in, I was ruining the family dream. I was being selfish. I was being weak. The pressure was suffocating, a silent but heavy weight pressing down on my chest. But the real turning point, the moment the ceiling started to crack visibly, happened a few weeks ago. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon. I was just finishing up a grueling day at work, mentally exhausted but feeling a sense of accomplishment from closing a major deal. My phone buzzed, a text from Mark. "Hey, quick question. Need about 10 koi for a new venture. Super hot. Guaranteed returns. Can you send it over ASAP? Need it by end of week. $10,000. Just like that. No explanation, no details, just an expectation. It wasn't even a question. It was a demand. A casual assumption that my money was his for the taking. My jaw clenched. This was beyond audacious. This was insulting. I typed out a reply, then deleted it. What venture too soft? I don't have it. A lie. And they'd see right through it? No, too blunt. Would trigger a meltdown. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the anger bubbling inside me. This wasn't the first time, not by a long shot, last year. It was a revolutionary app that ended up being a poorly designed website with 0 users. Before that, a boutique coffee shop that lasted 3 months. Each time, I'd poured my hard-earned money into his pipe dreams, only to watch it vanish into thin air. And each time, when I'd timidly ask about repayment, he'd either laugh it off or turn it around on me, making me feel like the greedy one. "Alex, are you serious right now? We're family. Why are you nickel and diming me? You have plenty. Are you trying to hold me back?" My parents, of course, always backed him up. "He's your brother, Alex. He just needs a little leg up. You're so fortunate. You can afford it." This time, something in me snapped. Not outwardly, not yet, but internally. A quiet, almost imperceptible shift occurred. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the utter lack of respect, the blatant disregard for my hard work, my sacrifices, my very identity as an independent adult. They saw me as an endless resource, a bottomless well of financial support and emotional resilience to be drained at their leisure. My feelings, my needs, my boundaries, they were invisible. I stared at Mark's text, the words weak and selfish echoing in my mind from past confrontations. They always use those words to manipulate me, to make me doubt myself, to force me back into line. But what if? What if standing up for myself wasn't weak at all? What if giving in was the true weakness? What if saying no was, in fact, the strongest thing I could do? The thought was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. It was a tiny spark, barely visible, but it was there. It promised freedom. But it also threatened a massive explosion. I knew, deep down, that if I said no to Mark, if I finally drew a line in the sand, it wouldn't just be a simple disagreement. It would be an all-out war. And they would come at me with everything they had. They would call me weak, ungrateful, a traitor to the family. They would try to break me. But this time, I wasn't sure they could. Something had changed. The slow leak had become a flood. And I was tired of bailing water. I was ready to build a dam. Or maybe, just maybe, I was ready to let the whole damn house collapse and build my own, stronger one, on my own terms. So, for those of you who've ever felt like your family sees you as nothing more than a bank account with legs, or someone to constantly lean on, or maybe even someone whose accomplishments are always overshadowed by their own perceived needs, trust me, you're not alone. And if you've ever been called weak for wanting to protect your own peace, your own sanity, your own hard-earned resources, well, stick around, because this is where my story gets interesting. This is where I started to learn that sometimes the most profound strength comes from refusing to be weak for anyone else's convenience. The silent shift inside me after Mark's audacious text wasn't a sudden earthquake, but more like a tectonic plate grinding slowly beneath the surface. It was imperceptible to anyone else, but for me, it was a profound tremor. I still went through the motions. I answered work emails, attended meetings, even managed a polite, if strained, smile when I saw my colleagues. But my mind was a whirlwind of memories, each one a sharp shard of disrespect, a blatant dismissal of my worth, all under the guise of familial love. It was like a dam had finally developed a crack. And the repressed memories, the forgotten slights, the swallowed words, were starting to trickle through. I remembered being a little girl, maybe 7 or 8, excitedly showing my parents a drawing I'd done. It was a colorful, slightly lopsided house with a big sun. My mom glanced at it, nodded vaguely, then immediately turned her attention to Mark, who was struggling with a math problem. "Alex, why don't you go help your brother with his homework? He's having a hard time. My needs, my accomplishments, always secondary to his." Then there was high school. I was a straight A student, excelling in everything. I got into a prestigious university on a partial scholarship. My parents were proud, yes, but their praise always had an asterisk. "You're so studious. Alex, not like your brother, who's more of a free spirit." It sounded like a compliment, but it felt like a dismissal of my efforts, a way to elevate Mark's lack of academic achievement by framing it as a charming personality trait. They never celebrated my intelligence as a strength, but rather as a tool to be wielded for the family's benefit. "You'll make so much money, Alex. You'll take care of us when we're old." It wasn't a casual comment, it was a prophecy, a decree. Even now, their language reflected this dynamic. When I spoke about a successful project at work, they'd nod, maybe say that's nice, then immediately pivot to Mark's latest big idea or how he needed some help with rent. My achievements were merely a prelude to their demands. My entire life, it seemed, had been subtly, or not so subtly, steered towards becoming the family's financial bedrock, while Mark was allowed to flounder, to find himself, to constantly need rescuing. The weak label they'd thrown at me stung the most. I was the one who worked 60-hour weeks, who meticulously managed her finances, who had built a life for herself from the ground up. Mark, meanwhile, couldn't hold down a job for more than 6 months and was constantly borrowing money. Yet, I was the weak one for not blindly handing over my earnings. It was a twisted, infuriating logic. One evening, I was having dinner with Chloe, my best friend since college. Chloe is a no-nonsense kind of person, a fierce advocate for herself and her loved ones. She's been my rock through countless professional challenges, but I'd always kept the depth of my family issues hidden, mostly out of shame. I'd offer vague complaints about family drama, but never the full, ugly truth of the financial exploitation and emotional manipulation. But this time, I couldn't keep it in. I was unusually quiet, picking at my food, lost in thought. "Okay, spill it, Alex," Chloe said, putting down her fork. Her eyes, usually sparkling with humor, were serious. "You've been off all week. And don't give me that work stress excuse. This is different." I hesitated. Then the words started tumbling out, a torrent of years of suppressed frustration. I told her about Mark's latest 10K demand, about the constant pressure to buy the family dream home, about the endless cycle of bailouts and guilt trips. I recounted the casual dismissiveness, the way my achievements were minimized, the way they constantly invoked family duty. I even confessed the chilling feeling of being called weak for even thinking about saying no. Chloe listened patiently, her expression growing increasingly alarmed. When I finally ran out of breath, there was a long silence. "Alex," she began, her voice low and firm. "Are you hearing yourself right now?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" "You're an incredibly successful, intelligent, and capable woman. You've built an amazing career, you're financially independent, and your family treats you like an ATM and a doormat. They tell you you're weak for wanting to protect what you've earned. That's not love, Alex. That's manipulation. That's emotional abuse, pure and simple." The words hit me like a splash of cold water. Emotional abuse. I'd never dared to label it that way. It sounded so harsh, so extreme, especially when applied to my own family. But as Chloe spoke, the pieces of the puzzle started to fit together. "They've conditioned you," Chloe continued, her voice softening slightly, but still resolute. "They've trained you to believe that your worth is tied to how much you give them, how much you sacrifice for them. And if you don't comply, they make you feel guilty, selfish, ungrateful. It's a classic tactic. Sweetie, it's called gaslighting and financial abuse." My mind reeled. Gaslighting, financial abuse. These were clinical terms, often associated with abusive relationships, Could my family, my own parents and brother, really be doing that to me? The idea was jarring, deeply uncomfortable, yet undeniably true the more I thought about it. Think about it, Chloe urged, sensing my internal struggle. When do they celebrate you most? When you've done something for them? Right when you've helped Mark? When you've paid for something? When you've fallen in line? And when do they call you weak or selfish? When you try to assert your own needs, your own boundaries. See the pattern. A painful knot tightened in my stomach. She was right. Every single time I had tried to put my own needs first, even in the smallest way, I was met with resistance, with disappointment, with accusations. It was never about my well-being. It was always about their convenience. But they're my family, I whispered, the ingrained guilt rising to the surface. They love me. They expect a lot. Chloe sighed, a sympathetic but firm sound. Alex, love doesn't come with conditions like that. Love doesn't deplete you. Love doesn't demand your financial ruin. Love doesn't make you feel guilty for simply existing as an independent person. What they're doing isn't love, it's control. They benefit from keeping you small, from keeping you dependent on their approval, and from keeping you feeling guilty enough to hand over your money. Her words were a brutal dose of reality, but they were also a lifeline. It was like someone had finally handed me a flashlight in a dark, confusing maze. Suddenly, the shadows started to take shape. The monsters weren't just vague fears anymore, but tangible forms. So, what do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The idea of confronting them, of truly standing up for myself, felt monumental, terrifying. It felt like severing a limb. You start by protecting yourself, Chloe said, her gaze unwavering. You stop giving them money, for starters, especially Mark. You need to understand that every time you bail him out, you're enabling his irresponsibility. You're teaching him that he doesn't have to face consequences, because you'll always be there to pick up the pieces. And you're teaching your parents that they can continue to exploit you because you'll always say yes. She continued, and you need to set clear, firm boundaries, and you need to stick to them, no matter how much they resist, no matter how much they try to guilt trip you, because they will resist. They will fight you every step of the way because their entire system of convenience relies on you being compliant. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I knew she was right. I knew the storm that would erupt if I truly stood my ground. But a different kind of feeling was starting to blossom alongside the fear, a quiet resolve. For years, I had believed their narrative that I was weak, that I needed them, that my value was contingent on my subservience. But Chloe's words, backed by the undeniable evidence of my own life, were slowly but surely dismantling that false reality. I spent the next few days in a haze, replaying conversations with my family, examining their patterns of behavior. Every casual comment, every suggestion, every favor I'd done, now seemed tainted with a sinister undercurrent of manipulation. The house I'd been so pressured to invest in, it wasn't a family dream, it was their dream. Funded by my money, serving their desire for status and comfort. With no regard for my own financial goals or independence, I looked at my bank statements, at the significant sums I'd transferred to Mark over the years, the loans that were never repaid, the investments that vanished. My stomach churned. How could I have been so blind, so naive? The shame was overwhelming, but underneath it, a spark of anger began to glow. Not just anger at them, but anger at myself for allowing it to happen for so long, for believing their lies, for letting them call me weak. I realized then that the strength they accused me of lacking was precisely the strength I needed to cultivate. The strength to say no, the strength to walk away from toxic dynamics, the strength to prioritize my own well-being over their unreasonable demands. That night, I sat down at my kitchen table, laptop open, and started researching. I looked up articles on financial abuse within families, on setting boundaries, on gaslighting. The more I read, the more I saw my own situation reflected in those clinical descriptions. It was a painful education, but it was also incredibly empowering. It gave a name to the amorphous dread I'd been feeling for years. It validated my instincts. It told me I wasn't crazy, I wasn't selfish, and I certainly wasn't weak. I was a victim of a pervasive, long-standing pattern of abuse. The seed of doubt Chloe had planted had taken root, and it was growing into a mighty tree of understanding. I saw the cracks in the foundation of my relationship with my family, and I realized that those cracks had been there since the very beginning, carefully disguised, but always present. The golden cage wasn't just built to hold me, it was built to drain me. And now I was ready to pick the lock, or, if necessary, to smash it open. The anger and the newfound clarity were like fuel, igniting a resolve I hadn't known I possessed. My journey from weak to strong wouldn't be easy. I knew that. It would be messy, painful, and probably involve a lot of tears. But for the first time in my life, I felt a surge of genuine power, the power of truth, the power of self-respect, and the power of finally deciding to stand up for myself, no matter the cost. The realization, that jarring truth bomb Chloe had dropped on me, wasn't just a seed of doubt anymore. It was a rapidly blooming, thorny bush. And the more I pruned away the layers of denial and ingrained guilt, the more clearly I saw the tangled roots of their manipulation. My initial anger began to morph into something colder, something more purposeful, a steely resolve fueled by a burning desire for clarity and, yes, a desperate need for proof. I needed to understand the full extent of the deception, not just for myself, but to solidify my conviction for the battle ahead. This wasn't just about Mark's latest $10,000 demand. That was merely the spark. The real fire had been smoldering for years, fed by countless subtle acts of financial drain and emotional invalidation. Now, I was ready to fan those flames and bring everything into the light. My job in finance, ironic as it was, had equipped me with the perfect skill set for what I was about to do. I was meticulous, analytical, and I knew how to dig. My first step was to discreetly gather every piece of financial information I could lay my hands on. This meant reviewing years of bank statements, credit card bills, and even old tax returns that I still had access to through a shared family online portal that my parents, in their tech illiteracy, had never bothered to secure properly. What I found was sickening. It wasn't just the large, direct transfers to Mark for his ventures. It was the smaller, insidious drains, the emergency car repairs for my parents' vehicles that always seemed to coincide with my bonuses, the help with their mortgage payments when they were supposedly struggling, only for me to later see photos on social media of their elaborate vacations. The constant stream of gifts I was expected to buy for relatives, holidays, or birthdays, always at a higher price point than I could comfortably afford. Because Alex earns so much, she can handle it. Then there was the family dream home they'd been pushing. I decided to dig into that particularly deep. I knew my parents had some savings, and their retirement accounts, while not huge, were certainly not dire. Yet, they insisted they couldn't afford this house without my significant investment. Out of morbid curiosity, and armed with my professional knowledge, I pulled public records for property values in that specific wealthy suburb. The houses there were indeed magnificent, but they were also astronomically expensive, far exceeding my parents' stated budget. Even with my contribution, what truly sent a chill down my spine was when I cross-referenced the estimated property taxes and upkeep costs. The numbers were staggering, even if I poured in a substantial down payment. My parents would be struggling to maintain it. It wasn't a dream home. It was a financial black hole designed to perpetually tether me to them, guaranteeing I'd have to keep funneling money into it just to keep it afloat. They weren't just asking for a one-time contribution. They were setting me up for a lifetime of financial servitude. And then, I stumbled upon something truly damning. Hidden deep within a folder on the shared family drive, disguised as household expenses, were a series of email exchanges between my mother and Mark. My blood ran cold as I scrolled through them. They weren't just discussing their financial needs. They were explicitly strategizing how to convince me, how to gently pressure me, how to make Alex see reason. They talked about playing on my sense of family duty and my generosity. They even discussed setting up a joint bank account for the family home fund that they expected me to contribute to exclusively. With them having full access, one email from my mother to Mark, dated just a few weeks prior to his $10K text, made my stomach clench. It read, "Mark, We need to push Alex harder on the house. She's dragging her feet. Maybe you can hit her up for some business money soon. Drain her a bit. Then we can swoop in with the house idea as a solution for her money sitting around. She's too conservative with her savings. She needs to understand that her money is family money. Her money is family money. The words echoed in my head, a chilling affirmation of Chloe's accusations. They didn't see my money as mine. They saw it as a communal resource, one they were entitled to, and one that I was selfishly hoarding. They weren't just asking for help. They were actively plotting, strategizing, manipulating me behind my back. This wasn't oversight or desperation. This was a calculated campaign of financial exploitation and emotional coercion. The betrayal was a physical ache in my chest. It felt like a punch to the gut, winded me. For years, I had bent over backward, sacrificed my own financial goals, and endured their condescension, all because I believed they loved me and genuinely needed my help. To discover it was a cynical game, a systematic draining of my resources, shattered something deep inside me. The tears came then, hot and stinging, not tears of sadness, but of pure, unadulterated rage. Rage at them, but also rage at myself for being so foolish, so trusting, so blind for so long. I printed out the damning emails, every single one of them. I created a spreadsheet, meticulously detailing every transfer, every loan, every gift, cross-referencing it with my own bank statements. The total sum was staggering, easily in the six figures over the past decade. It wasn't just pocket change. It was a substantial chunk of my net worth. Money that could have been a down payment on my own dream home. Money that could have been invested for my retirement. Money that I had earned through grueling hard work and countless hours of sacrifice. I looked at the mountain of evidence, and the shame began to dissipate, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They called me weak. They called me selfish. They had no idea what strength truly looked like. My strength wasn't just about earning money. It was about protecting it, about protecting myself. And now, my strength would be their undoing. I immediately called Chloe. I found things, I said, my voice shaking slightly, but with a new edge of determination. Things that confirm everything you said. Worse, even. Chloe listened, her own outrage palpable through the phone. Alex, this is huge. This isn't just a boundary issue. This is a pattern of severe financial and emotional abuse. You need to protect yourself, legally and financially. She advised me to consult a financial advisor specializing in family disputes, and perhaps even a therapist. You've been gaslighted for years. Alex, you need to process this, to understand that this isn't your fault, and you need professional guidance on how to untangle yourself from this, without getting financially ruined in the process. The next day, I scheduled appointments. The financial advisor, a stern but sympathetic woman named Ms. Davies, confirmed my worst fears. Based on this evidence, Alex, your family has been systematically exploiting you. The proposed family home scheme is a classic trap designed to make you indefinitely liable. You absolutely cannot go through with it. She advised me to freeze any existing joint accounts if there were any. Thankfully, there weren't. Review all my beneficiaries. And consider a legal letter formally requesting repayment for past loans, though she cautioned that actually recovering the money might be difficult given the informal nature of the agreements. The main goal, she stressed, was to establish a clear paper trail and create a clean break. My first therapy session was even more illuminating. Dr. Elena Ramirez was a kind, perceptive woman with a gentle voice that belied her sharp insights. As I recounted my story, she nodded, her expression unwavering. Alex, what you've experienced is a textbook case of covert narcissism and financial exploitation within a family system. Your parents, and likely your brother, have created a dynamic where your role is to cater to their needs and desires, always at your own expense. They use guilt, shame, and the threat of emotional abandonment to control you. She explained that their accusations of me being weak were a projection of their own insecurities and a desperate attempt to regain control. When you start to assert yourself, you threaten their entire system. They will escalate. They will lash out. They will try every tactic in their playbook to pull you back into line. But remember this, Alex, their anger is not about you. It's about their loss of control over you. The therapy sessions became my sanctuary, a place where I could unpack years of emotional baggage, where I learned to recognize the insidious patterns of their manipulation, and where I started to rebuild my sense of self-worth, piece by painful piece. It was agonizing at times, dredging up old wounds, but it was also incredibly liberating. I was learning to reframe my experiences, to see their weakness accusation not as a personal flaw, but as a misguided attempt to keep me in their thrall. My refusal to be controlled was not weakness. It was an act of profound self-preservation. It was strength. I didn't reply to Mark's text about the $10,000. Not yet. I was formulating a plan, not just to say no, but to dismantle their entire system. The time for timid refusals and quiet defiance was over. I had the evidence. I had the professional advice. And most importantly, I had a burning fire of self-respect that had been ignited by betrayal. They thought they had seen my weakness. They were about to witness the true consequences of my strength. The raw, burning anger that had consumed me after uncovering the extent of their betrayal slowly began to crystallize into something far more potent strategic resolve. The days of emotional reactions were over. I wasn't just hurt, I was informed, armed with cold, hard facts and expert advice. The therapy sessions with Dr. Ramirez were invaluable, helping me process the emotional trauma and fortify my resolve. She emphasized that this confrontation wouldn't just be about money. It would be about reclaiming my narrative and demonstrating that I was no longer the weak, compliant daughter they had groomed. My first step was to deal with Mark's absurd $10,000 demand. For days, I'd left his text unread, a deliberate act of defiance that I knew would irk him. The casual entitlement of it, the expectation that I was his personal ATM, was infuriating. But I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of an immediate, angry refusal. I needed to approach this with calculated precision. I drafted a polite but firm email to Mark, copying my parents. It was short, businesslike, and devoid of emotion. Subject: regarding your recent request. Hi Mark, I received your request for $10,000 for a new venture. As you know, I've supported several of your past projects financially. Unfortunately, none of those investments have yielded any returns, nor have the principal amounts been repaid as discussed. While I wish you success in your future endeavors, I am unable to provide any further financial assistance at this time. My financial priorities have shifted, and I am focusing on my own long-term goals. I hope you understand. Best, Alex. I hit send, my finger hovering over the mouse button for a moment, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. This was it, the first tangible step. No explanations, no apologies, no room for negotiation, just a clear no. The email was a direct, unapologetic assertion of a boundary, and I knew it would land like a bomb. The response was swift and predictable. My phone rang almost immediately, Mark's number flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Then my mom called. I let that go to voicemail too. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced myself to breathe. Stay strong, Alex. This is what they do. They try to wear you down. Mark's voicemail was a masterpiece of entitled fury. Alex, what the hell is this email? Are you serious? I need that money. This is a huge opportunity. What do you mean your financial priorities have shifted? You're rich. You're abandoning your own brother after everything I've done for you. His voice escalated, ending in a frustrated roar. My mom's voicemail was more insidious. Her voice was laced with a sickly sweet disappointment, tinged with a passive-aggressive edge. Alex, darling, I just saw your email to Mark. What's wrong? Is everything okay? You sound so cold. We're family. Sweetie. You know Mark just needs a little bit of a push. It's not like he asked for much. Are you really going to let your brother down like this? He's so upset. And honestly, it hurts Dad and me to see you behave this way. We've always been there for you. The guilt trip. It was textbook. But this time, it didn't land. My time with Dr. Ramirez had been dedicated to dissecting these very tactics. Their disappointment is a tool, Alex, she had explained. It's designed to make you feel bad enough to revert to your old patterns. It's not genuine concern for you. It's concern for their losing control over your resources. I didn't respond to their calls or voicemails. Instead, I focused on the next phase of my plan, the confrontation about the family dream home. This was going to be the real battleground. I waited until our usual Sunday family dinner. I knew it was a terrible idea to confront them in person, especially alone, but I wanted to do it face to face. I wanted them to see the change in my eyes, to feel the shift in my demeanor. I needed to stand my ground in their territory. Chloe had offered to come, but I needed to do this myself. This was my transformation, my fight. I arrived at my parents' house. The familiar sense of dread mixed with a potent cocktail of determination. The air was already thick with unspoken tension. Mark was there, sulking, occasionally shooting me resentful glances. My parents tried to act normal, overly polite, clearly waiting for me to break, to apologize, to offer an explanation. Dinner was a strained affair. Small talk, forced smiles. My mom kept trying to steer the conversation towards inconsequential topics. Avoiding the elephant in the room, finally, after dessert, Dad cleared his throat. "So, Alex," he began, his voice a little too casual, "about Mark's situation, and then, of course, the house. We need to talk, don't we?" This was my cue. I took a deep breath, planting my feet firmly on the floor. "Yes, Dad, we do. And I want to be very clear about a few things." I looked at each of them, meeting their gaze head on. Mark looked away first, fidgeting. My mom's smile faltered. My dad's brow furrowed. First, I started, my voice steady, betraying none of the tremor in my hands that were clasped under the table. Regarding Mark's request for $10,000, my email stands. I will not be providing any more financial assistance to Mark for his business ventures or personal expenses. I've done so repeatedly in the past, and it has only enabled a pattern of irresponsibility and a lack of accountability. I cannot, and will not, continue to do so. Mark scoffed. "Oh, here we go, Miss Perfect saving her pennies. What, suddenly too good for your own family, Alex?" "Mark, that's enough," Dad interjected, but his tone lacked conviction. I ignored Mark, keeping my focus on my parents. "And second, regarding the family dream home, I've done my research. I've looked at the property values, the taxes, the maintenance costs, and I've also seen the emails between you, Mom, and Mark, discussing how to convince me, how to drain me to make Alex see reason about my money being family money." The air in the room became instantly glacial. My mom's face went white. Mark's eyes widened, a flicker of panic replacing his usual arrogance. Dad just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. "What emails?" my mom stammered, her voice thin. "Alex, what are you talking about? That's absurd." "Don't pretend you don't know, Mom," I said, my voice rising slightly, but still controlled. "I have them all. The ones where you talk about setting me up to funnel money into a house you can't afford. The ones where you plot about how to manipulate me into giving more money to Mark. It's all there, in black and white." I reached into my bag and pulled out the neatly printed stack of emails, placing them on the table. The rustle of the papers seemed deafening in the sudden silence. My mom flinched as if the papers were radioactive. Mark visibly swallowed, his face now a sickly shade of green. "For years," I continued, my voice now laced with the pain of betrayal, "I've given and given and given, financially, emotionally. I've bent over backward, canceled my own plans, sacrificed my own savings, all because I believed I was helping my family, that you genuinely needed it. And all this time, you were planning, strategizing, treating me like a fool. You called me weak for daring to think of myself, but you were the ones acting from a position of profound weakness, exploiting your own daughter for your convenience and your brother's irresponsibility." My mom finally found her voice, a choked, indignant sound. "How dare you, Alex? We are your parents, we raised you, we gave you everything. This is how you repay us by accusing us, by bringing up private conversations about my money and my future, that you were orchestrating behind my back," I countered, cutting her off, something I had never done before. "You didn't give me everything, Mom. You took my peace of mind. You took my financial independence. and you tried to take my self-respect. You taught me that my value was solely in what I could provide for you, not who I was as a person. Dad, who had been silent, finally spoke, his voice low and dangerous. Alex, you are being completely disrespectful. You have no right to speak to your mother or your brother like this. You're talking about abuse after everything we've done. This is what happens when you get too big for your britches. You forget where you came from. You're being ungrateful. You're being selfish. Selfish, I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Is it selfish to want to save for my own retirement? Is it selfish to want to buy my own home instead of funding yours? Is it selfish to refuse to enable a grown man who refuses to take responsibility for his own life? I gestured to Mark, who now looked like a cornered animal. Is it selfish to expect basic respect for my hard work and my boundaries? This is not you, Alex, my mom cried, her voice rising in pitch. You're being manipulated. Who put these ideas in your head? Is it that friend of yours, Chloe, or some therapist filling your head with nonsense? She was grasping at straws, desperate to find an external reason for my defiance. No one put these ideas in my head. Mom, I said, my voice quiet but firm. My own experiences and your actions did. I simply chose to finally open my eyes. And yes, I am getting help to understand and overcome the emotional damage you've inflicted. My declaration hung in the air, a stark, undeniable truth. My parents looked utterly shell-shocked, as if they had never imagined I would actually articulate their manipulations. Mark, meanwhile, was silently seething, his earlier panic giving way to impotent rage. From this day forward, I stated, my voice gaining strength with each word, my finances are completely separate. There will be no more loans for Mark. There will be no investments in any family home. I will not be your bank, and I will not be a pawn in your games. You may call me weak for standing up for myself, but I call it strength, and I will not tolerate any further attempts to guilt trip, manipulate, or disrespect me. If you cannot respect my boundaries, then I will limit contact. It's that simple. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the silence of shattered illusions, of power dynamics dramatically shifting. My parents looked at me as if I had grown a second head, or perhaps as if I had suddenly transformed into a stranger. Their faces were a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a profound sense of outrage that their carefully constructed world was crumbling. I stood up, pushing my chair back. I've said what I needed to say. You can't just leave, my mom shrieked, finally erupting. This is our family. You're destroying everything. No, Mom, I replied, looking directly into her eyes, my voice unwavering. You destroyed it when you chose to exploit me instead of love me for who I am. I'm simply reclaiming what's left of my life. I walked out of the dining room, leaving them stunned amidst the remains of what they thought was a happy family dinner. As I closed the front door behind me, the last thing I heard was my mother's wail and Mark's angry, desperate yell. You'll regret this. Alex, you'll be all alone. But as I stepped into the cool night air, a profound sense of calm washed over me. I wasn't alone. I had Chloe. I had Dr. Ramirez. And most importantly, I had myself. For the first time in my life, I felt truly free. The gilded cage was no longer gilded. It was smashed open. And I was flying. They called me weak for standing up for myself. But the look on their faces, the sheer terror and disbelief, told me they had just faced the consequences of my strength. The silence that followed my departure from my parents' house was not peaceful. It was the silence before the storm, a pregnant pause filled with the unspoken fury of those who had just lost control. I knew, with every fiber of my being, that this was just the beginning. Their system, built on my compliance, had been violently disrupted, and they would not let it go without a fight. Dr. Ramirez had prepared me for this. She called it the extinction burst, the desperate escalation of manipulative behaviors when old tactics stop working. My phone, which had been buzzing incessantly the night of the confrontation, went eerily quiet for a few days. This was a tactic itself, designed to make me anxious, to second-guess myself, to wonder if I had truly destroyed the family, as my mother had screamed. But I held firm. I leaned heavily on Chloe, replaying the entire confrontation for her, savoring her fierce validation. "You were incredible, Alex," she'd said, her voice brimming with pride. "You finally put yourself first. This is what strength looks like." The quiet didn't last. The first volley came in the form of a barrage of text messages. Not directly to me, but to our extended family group chat. The one I had muted weeks ago but still occasionally scrolled through out of habit. My aunt, my mother's sister, posted a vague but pointed message. "So sad to see families tearing themselves apart over misunderstandings and selfishness. Remember, blood is thicker than water." Immediately, cousins and other aunts, who had always benefited from my parents' largesse and by extension, mine, started liking and commenting with sad emojis and cryptic messages about respecting elders and family values. This was the covert shaming tactic. They weren't directly accusing me, but they were rallying the family troops, subtly poisoning the well, making me out to be the villain without ever naming me. It was insidious, designed to isolate me and make me feel like an outcast. My mom then graduated to direct attacks, though still via text. "I can't believe you would abandon your own brother when he needs help. He's struggling. Alex, he's depressed because of your cruelty. Are you happy now? Do you feel good about destroying your family?" Mark, surprisingly, was quieter. But his occasional texts were venomous, calling me a bitch and saying I'd regret this when you're old and alone. I blocked Mark's number. I muted the family group chat permanently. And to my mother's texts, I crafted a single, pre-approved response, straight from Dr. Ramirez's playbook. "Mom, I am not discussing this further. My decision stands. If you wish to have a relationship with me, it must be based on mutual respect and healthy boundaries. I love you, but I will not tolerate disrespect or manipulation." Then, I put my phone on silent and refused to engage. The silence returned, but this time, it felt different. It was less about their tactical retreat and more about their shock. They couldn't believe I wasn't caving. They couldn't believe their usual weapons, guilt, shame, and the threat of emotional abandonment were no longer working. This infuriated them even more. The next escalation came a week later. My parents showed up at my apartment building unannounced. It was a Saturday morning. I was just getting ready to go for a run. The doorman called up. "Miss Davies, your parents are here. They say it's an emergency." My heart pounded, but I forced myself to remain calm. "Thank you. Please tell them I'm not available right now. I'm busy." A few minutes later, my phone rang. It was my mom, her voice shrill with indignation. "Alex, what is wrong with you? We're your parents. You're going to make us stand out here in the cold. Let us up right now." "Mom, I told you, I'm busy," I said, my voice steady, though my hand was trembling slightly. "And I already told you that if you cannot respect my boundaries, I will limit contact. Coming to my apartment unannounced is a violation of my boundaries. I will not let you up." "This is ridiculous," she screeched. "What kind of daughter are you? We'll just wait here until you come down." "That's your choice, Mom," I replied, feeling a surge of power from sticking to my guns. "But I won't be coming down. Goodbye." I hung up. I paced my apartment, adrenaline coursing through me. This was hard. This was agonizing. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to go down there, to explain myself, to try and fix it. But I knew that was their trap. To engage was to invite them back into my life on their terms. This was the consequence of my strength. The pain of setting boundaries against people who refused to acknowledge them. An hour later, the doorman called again. "Miss Davies, your parents have left. They seemed very upset." A sigh of relief escaped me. I had held my ground. It was a small victory, but a significant one. It proved to me that I could do it, that I could enforce my boundaries, even when it felt like tearing a piece of myself away. The biggest challenge came during the holidays. Thanksgiving was always a big family affair, a time for forced cheer and endless questions about my love life and career, always subtly hinting at how I could do more for the family. This year, I decided not to go. I sent a short, polite email to my parents 2 weeks before the holiday. "Dear Mom and Dad, I won't be able to make it for Thanksgiving this year. I've made other plans. I hope you have a lovely time." The response was immediate and furious. My mother called. My father called. Mark sent angry texts. Other plans. What other plans could be more important than your family on Thanksgiving? My mother wailed about how lonely they would be, how I was abandoning them, how I was ruining their last happy holiday. This was the emotional blackmail, magnified. They were trying to weaponize my empathy, to make me feel responsible for their emotional state. But I held firm. I responded to none of their calls or texts. I booked a short trip out of town with Chloe and another friend, a much-needed escape. When I returned, the emotional fallout was immense. My mom left me a scathing voicemail, accusing me of being heartless, selfish, and cold. "You are not the daughter we raised. Alex," she sobbed. "You've changed. You've become so cruel. We don't even know you anymore, and honestly, it makes us wonder if we ever did." That last line hit me hard. "We don't even know you anymore." It was meant to wound, to make me doubt myself. But instead, a different thought resonated. Good. Because the me they knew was a prisoner. The me they knew was weak because I allowed them to make me weak. The me they knew was designed for their convenience, not for my own well-being. This wasn't about them knowing the real me. It was about them refusing to accept the stronger, authentic me who refused to be their puppet. Their outrage wasn't because I had changed. It was because I had stopped being useful to them in the way they wanted. The public shaming escalated too. My mother started posting cryptic, victim-blaming messages on social media, hinting at family heartbreak and difficult children who forget their roots. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years started sending me direct messages, some genuinely concerned, others clearly acting as flying monkeys, repeating my parents' narrative. "Alex, your mom is so upset. She says you won't talk to them. Is everything okay? Your parents are heartbroken. They say you're cutting them off. Family is so important. Don't you think?" I chose to respond to some, briefly and calmly. My relationships are based on mutual respect. Unfortunately, that wasn't happening. I'm setting healthy boundaries for my well-being. That's all I'm going to say about it. For others, I simply left them on read. I learned that I didn't owe anyone an explanation for protecting my peace. My well-being was not up for public debate. The most difficult part of this phase was the internal struggle. There were moments of profound loneliness, moments where the ingrained guilt threatened to overwhelm me. Had I gone too far? Was I really a bad person? Had I truly destroyed my family? Dr. Ramirez was my anchor during these times. She constantly reminded me that their accusations were projections. Their pain was a consequence of their own choices, and my strength was not a weapon, but a shield. "Alex, they are mourning the loss of their access to you, not necessarily the loss of you," she explained gently. "Their definition of family is based on control and dependency. When you challenge that, they feel abandoned. But that's not your burden to carry. You are breaking a toxic cycle." Over the next few months, the pressure from my family slowly began to wane, not because they accepted my boundaries, but because they realized their tactics were no longer effective. The calls became less frequent, the texts more sporadic. Mark's attempts to borrow money ceased entirely. The public shaming posts disappeared. They hadn't changed, but I had, and my unyielding strength in maintaining my boundaries had finally forced them to face the consequences of my unwavering resolve. I started to feel a lightness, a freedom I hadn't known was possible. The constant anxiety that had been a low hum in the background of my life for years began to fade. My focus shifted from managing their expectations to nurturing my own life. I invested more in my friendships. I pursued new hobbies. And I rediscovered the joy of simply existing without the crushing weight of their demands. They called me weak. They called me selfish. But as I stood firm, unwavering in the face of their furious pushback, I realized the truth. My strength wasn't just about my ability to earn money. It was about my courage to say no, to protect my peace, and to build a life on my own terms, free from their toxic control. The fallout was messy, painful, and deeply isolating at times, but it was also the most empowering journey I had ever embarked on. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, and my strength was my shield. The consequences of my strength were manifesting, and they were finally facing them. The storm had passed, or at least, the initial, most violent squall had. The frantic calls, the accusatory texts, the unannounced visits, they had all dwindled, replaced by an uneasy quiet. It wasn't peace, not yet. It was the silence of grudging acceptance from their end. Born not of understanding, but of sheer exhaustion and the undeniable realization that their usual tactics were utterly useless against my newly forged boundaries. For me, it was the beginning of rebuilding, of finally stepping out of the shadow of their expectations and into the light of my own autonomy. The immediate aftermath was still laced with moments of raw grief. I mourned the family I thought I had, the idealized version of unconditional love that had been shattered by the harsh light of reality. There were days I felt profoundly lonely, questioning if the price of freedom was too high. But then, I'd remember the emails, the calculations, the cold, calculating nature of their exploitation, and the resolve would solidify once more. This wasn't a choice. It was a necessity for my survival and my sanity. My sessions with Dr. Ramirez became less about processing immediate crises and more about long-term healing and self-discovery. She helped me reframe my understanding of family. Family isn't just about blood. Alex, she'd often say, it's about respect, trust, and mutual support. If those elements are missing, then the blood connection becomes a liability, not a bond. This was a profound shift in my perspective, allowing me to slowly let go of the guilt and embrace a new definition of connection. Financially, the changes were immediate and tangible, without the constant drain of Mark's ventures and my parents' emergencies. My savings grew exponentially. I finally had the capital to make a significant down payment on my own apartment, a charming 2-bedroom in a vibrant city neighborhood, truly mine, purchased with my hard-earned money, free from their shadow. Moving into that apartment felt like shedding a heavy cloak. It was more than just property. It was a symbol of my regained independence, a fortress I had built for myself. My professional life also flourished. The mental bandwidth that had previously been consumed by family drama was now freed up, allowing me to focus more deeply on my work. My performance improved, and I found myself taking on more challenging projects, excelling in ways I hadn't thought possible when I was constantly distracted by their demands. My colleagues noticed the change, the newfound confidence, the relaxed demeanor. I was no longer on edge, anticipating the next crisis call. I was simply me, fully present and capable. Mark, surprisingly, made a few half-hearted attempts to reconnect, likely running low on other sources of funds. His messages were usually variations of, "Hey, how are you, long time no talk?" devoid of any apology or acknowledgement of his past behavior. I didn't engage. My boundary was clear: no more financial support, and no more enabling, until he demonstrated genuine accountability and a willingness to change. There was nothing to discuss. I had learned that true healing in these situations requires the other party to acknowledge their part, not just miss the benefits they derived from you. My parents were a different story. The initial rage and indignation slowly morphed into a sort of melancholic resentment. My mother would occasionally send me long, rambling emails filled with veiled accusations and lamentations about the lost family and how I was missing out on so much. She'd try to paint herself as the victim, suffering silently. My father remained cold and distant, occasionally sending short, clipped messages asking if I was coming around for holidays, a clear sign they still expected me to eventually fall back into line. I chose a low-contact approach. I would respond to their emails once every few weeks, keeping my replies brief, polite, and completely devoid of any emotional engagement or details about my personal life. I wished them well, mentioned nothing of my accomplishments, and firmly reiterated my boundaries if they veered into manipulative territory. I didn't cut them off entirely, because a small part of me still held onto the hope of a truly healthy relationship, albeit a distant one, but I was no longer holding my breath. I had accepted that their inability to respect my autonomy was their problem, not mine. One day, several months after the initial confrontation, I received a rather formal email from my father. It stated that they were selling their house, the one I had helped them pay for, the one I had been pressured to invest in, and moving into a smaller, more manageable property. He ended the email with a terse, "We hope you are well." A strange mix of emotions washed over me, Relief? Certainly. The specter of the family dream home had finally vanished, but also a twinge of sadness. It was the end of an era, perhaps even the final nail in the coffin of the idealized family unit I had once desperately clung to. They had downsized, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Without my steady financial contributions, the lifestyle they had grown accustomed to was unsustainable. It was a clear, undeniable consequence of my strength. My refusal to enable their inflated spending habits had forced them to live within their actual means. I wrote a short reply, wishing them a smooth transition and reiterating my hope for their well-being. It was detached, respectful, and firm. My life truly began to thrive. I cultivated genuine, reciprocal relationships with friends who celebrated my successes and supported me through challenges. Without any hidden agendas, I adopted a rescue dog, a playful terrier mix named Luna, who filled my apartment with unconditional love and goofy antics. I started volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding a profound sense of purpose in giving back to my community. The weak label they had thrown at me felt like a distant, irrelevant whisper. I was strong, I was resilient, I was independent. My self-worth was no longer tied to their approval or their financial demands. It was intrinsic, built on my accomplishments, my integrity, and my unwavering commitment to my own well-being. Looking back, the confrontation wasn't just about money, it was about reclaiming my voice, my identity, and my future. It was about breaking a generational cycle of codependency and unspoken expectations. It was a painful, isolating journey at times, but it was also the most empowering act of self-love I had ever undertaken. To anyone out there who feels like they're being called weak for simply wanting to protect their peace, their finances, or their mental health from difficult family dynamics, hear this. Your boundaries are not selfish. They are essential. Your strength isn't measured by how much you sacrifice for others, but by how fiercely you protect yourself. It's hard, it's terrifying, but on the other side of that fear, there is freedom, there is peace, there is you, strong and whole and utterly, beautifully free. Don't let anyone diminish your strength by labeling your self-preservation as weakness. They're just projecting their own fears and their own reliance on your compliance. Stand up for yourself. The consequences might be difficult, but the reward, the reclaiming of your own life, is absolutely priceless. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more real talk narratives about navigating life's messy complexities. And please, share your own experiences in the comments below. You're not alone, and your story has power.